Why should someone bet on you and grid discovery?
Oh, simply put, Grid Discovery has amazing technology. We're backed by industry experts. We're backed by industry partners, and
today I chat with Matt Cristaldi, co-founder and CEO of a Techstars company called Grid Discovery. Grid Discovery offers a software solution for power engineers that makes it faster and easier to evaluate microgrid opportunities. And prior to Grid Discovery, Matt has completed over 50 projects in energy and is a 101st Airborne veteran. Matt quickly understood that microgrids matter now more than ever, and in this conversation, we talk about why that is and what he and his startup Grid Discovery are working on. This is Earth ABC, featuring Matt Cristaldi.
Matt, thank you so much again for being here. We got lots to talk about, but first, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Happy to have this convo, and yeah, let's talk microgrids.
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. I actually went down a rabbit hole on microgrids this past week after connecting with you and learning a bit about your company, Grid Discovery. And as you know, we recently had one of the worst hurricanes to date in Hurricane Helene, and it devastated like many southeastern cities and left them without electrical power. And one thing I learned about microgrids is that they're very valuable in keeping power alive in like regions, communities, and buildings during times like these. So I was like, awesome. Like, I'm talking to Matt, a guy all about microgrids. So I want to start by asking, what are microgrids? What are multi-building microgrids? And what's so compelling about needing them now more than ever?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting that you going down the rabbit hole of microgrids and kind of discovering those very important and specific use cases, especially when it comes to natural disasters, with hurricanes, wildfires, floods, and getting into what are microgrids. We're being challenged with a number of different external events that are factoring into the way that we live, the way that we consume energy, that we don't on a day-to-day basis ever had to think about in decades prior. But now we are having to think about, we're facing an aging grid that's saying, even as a typical residential home, they're losing power more frequently and they're noticing it. Or maybe their electrical bills are going up a little bit more and they're noticing it. And so what a microgrid is a centralized and local power plant. And think of a microgrid as just like a backup generator that can operate independent from the main utility grid. And then you have a multi-building microgrids, simply put, is just multiple buildings connected to that type of backup generator that can operate independent from the main grid. It's almost like, when you think about like the term microgrid, it's like taking the bigger electrical grid and just like shrinking it down to, a much smaller community. And we're seeing these pop up across the country. There's one in Alabama. There's one in Alabama that has anywhere between 45 and 60 residential single-family homes in a community connected to this microgrid, and it can isolate from the grid for a week. And so you're seeing in New Jersey, where I live, you're seeing a number of different projects because of Hurricane Sandy, like you had alluded to, this Hurricane Helene down that we just experienced in the southeast U.S. In 2013, New Jersey got hit with Hurricane Sandy, lost power across the state, New York City as well. And so New Jersey rushed to say, hey, how can we prevent this from happening? And so you're seeing a number of different multi-building microgrids that take in account police stations, fire stations, schools, all within a tight community. So, I mean, short answer to your question, they are little local power generators that can operate independent from the main grid.
Got you. Thank you for the elaborate response. I think microgrids, thinking them as like a compact version of the power grid, makes a lot of sense. I see that you've been posting a lot on LinkedIn, and I'm going to quote you for a second because I really like this. You said that everyone knows three things about the power grid. It's big, it's mysterious, and it can suddenly fail. And I couldn't agree more, and I think others would too. why aren't microgrids more prevalent in our existing infrastructure? Because it seems like developers have been taking like a reactionary position when it comes to power outages rather than it being preventative.
Yeah, I'm so glad you use that phrase, that reactionary positioning. And I think what's happening is that when we first built the grid and we first started expanding it, it was originally coined in the 30s and 40s. And Sam Insull from Chicago Edison started really saying, hey, we could take, Edison's generators, his local generators, and start moving power to consumers far away distances. First it was a couple of miles, then it was tens of miles, now it's hundreds of miles, and we can serve a large number of people. Well, that model is now reaching the peak of how it can operate. And so it's extremely expensive to generate power hundreds of miles away and send it to consumers. Sending it hundreds of miles away to the consumers, you're losing a lot of power transporting the energy to the generator. You're losing a lot of power converting that energy source, typically coal, nuclear, oil, natural gas, into electricity, then transporting it through the transmission and distribution lines. You're losing power through heat, congestion, and then going to the consumers themselves. So by the time you get the power from where it's being extracted to where it's being consumed, you're losing 75% of that power. And so
that's huge.
Yeah, it's really huge. And so now I think consumers are becoming more and more aware of this, especially as outages start increasing. And so we look at microgrids as a way to say, I can consume this power, or I can generate this power on site, and then I can consume it on site. And you're starting to see a transition from this local centralized model to more grid edge, where consumers are taking the initiative into their own hands of power generation. So as a business, if I can generate my own electricity and I can consume my own electricity, I can have better control over my operations. And I don't have to rely on somebody else to dictate how I can manage my business. You think of a manufacturing plant, if they lose power for a day, they're losing tens of millions of dollars of product. If you think of a police station or a hospital and they lose power, even just a segment of the hospital, that has dire consequences. Now, our critical facilities are powered mostly. They have backup generation and they can use it. But we're starting to see this in more private facilities that need that everyday operations. And so I think people are becoming a little bit more and more educated about that. It can drive down costs. It can keep their operations going. And that's what people are excited about.
Gotcha. So it seems like microgrids, one of the biggest motivations for implementing them are huge cost savings, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I guess who then owns a microgrid if it's implemented in like a community, or let's focus on multi-building microgrids. Who would own that?
Yeah. And that's the case. And this is what you would touch on in the model or in your previous question is like that reactionary period, that reactionary positioning in the market is also trying to figure out where do these projects get placed and who owns the project. And so that's kind of why we exist. And so grid discovery, that is. And when you're looking at a multi-building microgrid project, it's very complex on who is actually owning that project.
Right.
Because now you're factoring in who's generating the most. You're factoring in what are the different goals of the buildings or the building owners in the project. You're factoring in how much can they generate. So you maybe you have a building that has it's a low facility, wide operations, so it could be a great solar prosumer, and maybe they have a small energy load profile, so they could generate a lot of solar for the community, but maybe they're not consuming a lot. So they're a net positive producer of solar, and they can distribute that to other facilities. Now, would they be the owner? Not necessarily. And typically when you look at these projects, you want to see who is the most, like, who's the least risk averse of these facilities to make payments into that project. And that's kind of what you look at as like a host facility. But what we talk about when you touch on that reactionary positioning is, because of this reactionary positioning, because we are reacting, the engineers and developers are reacting to how they get projects. The businesses are reacting to the power outages that they are experiencing, the increased energy costs that they are experiencing. We need to turn the model to become more of a proactive aspect, where the engineers and developers can do research on where they should place the microgrids, and then have an optimized plan that says, we need to look at these types of facilities, standardize that project design, then go to those business owners, or go to that city, or go to that state planning agency and say, hey, we need a project here because of XYZ. And we think that will be the model for the future model for success and scaling.
So these developers and like project owners, like, are the users for grid discovery?
Yes. So Grid Discovery being that data and insightful platform to tell you where to go, why to go. We have great, powerful models that can help you optimize your multi-building project, figure out which buildings are prosumers, consumers, figure out which one is gonna incur most of the costs, which one can receive a lot of revenue generation from the prosumers. So when you factor in that aspect, the users of the tool are going to be the main point of contact for the project, which are going to be the developers and the engineering design firms. Now, so when you dive into these projects, you have the consumers of the data from the tool, but then you also have the consumers of the electrons. And the consumers of the electrons are going to be the building owners, and they may interact with the tool from a secondary position. So that means, like, let's say you and I are working on a microgrid project. You are the building owner, and I am the engineer in charge of managing this project. Now, you don't care about all the different technical aspects of the project. You may just want to see, what is it going to cost me? What is the benefit? What are the risks? Just like the high level stuff. Now, rather than me as the engineer giving you manual updates via email or door-to-door interaction, or planning these town board committee meetings where you're invited and you can see, part of Grid Discovery being that cloud-based interface is that you can come and see an interactive dashboard about your building, how much you can generate, how much revenue you can earn, how is that going to help you manage your business operations. And that's what going from a reactionary positioning to a proactive positioning, that's what's going to do for the market.
Gotcha. Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding now is that you essentially make it quicker and easier to evaluate multi-building microgrids used by engineers and design firms, which kind of see data and evaluate the microgrid, and then like business owners to kind of just have a high-level overview of that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, these projects are complex. They really are. They're very complex. They're very technical. We're not going to be able to solve everything immediately. And when you think about these projects, a ton of work goes into just making sure that this project can be either evaluated to a high technical degree, which happens in what's called a feasibility study. And then it has to go, if it gets past the feasibility study, then it goes into construction and operation. But there's a period, when you think about, let's say if a project is a 10-step process, step 0 to step 10, step 10 is like we're flicking on the switches. If we think about Grid Discovery operating in the first 3 days, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that goes on in those first 3 days, or those first 3 steps. Is project ideation, collecting data, working with the business owners, identifying the buildings, running like a pre-design assessment, engaging with those business owners. And then once we have a project, then it kind of moves into this later phases, step like 3 to 7, which says, now we're figuring out the design equipment. Now we're figuring out the different solar panels, the natural gas generators, the laws and regulations. Maybe we can't size it. We can't size it too much. We have to undersize it. We have to oversize it. All those little design questions. Now we have to submit the paperwork to the utility. There's so much to do, but by focusing on those first 3 steps, we are engaging the business owners. We're engaging the engineer and design firms. We're giving them a platform for them to go to experiment with scenarios and just ideate and ideate and ideate.
Gotcha. So before you even jump in to help them at like these steps like 1 to 3, where are these like business owners and engineer and design firms at in their own like microgrid like level of things?
Yeah. It depends. It depends on the business owners. It really depends on like what are their goals and what kind of problems are they experiencing. They may be experiencing problems, but they don't know that a microgrid is a solution. Maybe they're doing a little bit of research online. They're trying to figure out situations. Maybe they're consulting with their town planning board or their local. Maybe they have engineering contacts that they're consulting with. But for an engineering perspective, they rely on projects that, depending on their business model, some engineering firms purely act as consultants that do feasibility studies. And so they make money doing those feasibility studies, which are that step 0 to kind of step 7 process. So they kind of do everything, and that's all they do. But for a lot of engineering design firms, they make money once the project goes into operation. So they're incentivized to find projects that have a high degree or high chance of being transitioned to flicking on that switch. And so they make money from generating revenue. They make money from ancillary services of the project, meaning, can the project produce excess solar? Can the batteries, excess solar, sell it back to the grid, or net meter it to another building? Can the battery participate in frequency regulation for the grid? Can the battery or solar participate in demand response? These are types of like ancillary revenue generation services of the project. So the developers, the microgrid engineers, they want to get to that point. They make very little money on studying the project. So going back to your reactionary position, if engineering firms receive a project, they have to go through this one-time custom solution, figure out if it can work. If it can't work, they have to identify that quickly to save them time and cost. But if they can use grid discovery, go to an area with a lot of power outages, maybe high energy costs that yield, maybe there's legislation that is pro microgrid or pro non-wire solution, they could say, wow, that's a great area. Here's a great project. This has a high chance of succeeding. Let's focus on that.
Got you. And you mentioned high chance of succeeding. Is that the case across the board? Like, what do the users look like when they have like the highest chance of succeeding implementing like a microgrid solution?
Yeah, I mean, they're looking at what are the what's the building composition in that area? What kind of legislation is available? What is the energy cost? Do I have data available? Like, do I have one of the biggest things is collecting utility bills for the different building owners in the project. And coming across utility bills is extremely difficult. The building owners may not know what the utility bills are. They may not know where they're located. They may not know how to interpret them. And so now the engineering firm has to run down this data set. They can use grid discovery to get a really, really close to estimation. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of example load profiles for dozens of building types that can go in and say, okay, here's what this building is, here's what it looks like, here's a good estimation. And so they can estimate that and get an accurate assumption of what this project will cost and what kind of problems that they're going to run into should they go with this. So really, like, what what we're doing here is like short circuiting site discovery, like no pun intended, but you are you are simply mapping out where we should find the right project. And then the next thing that the engineer is going to have to do is site confirmation. We're not there yet, but now that we've shown them where to go, they then have to confirm that that's a good site. And that's up to their expertise, their team, getting boots on the ground and doing that. But, we've condensed their workload from here to here so that they could go in and do so.
Gotcha. And what's the time saving for them?
Yeah, so the time saving can be upwards of anywhere between 50 to 75%. When you think about the steps involved, doing all that work, collecting the data, doing a financial analysis, organizing business owners, organizing town meetings and updates, if we can condense all of those steps, we could pretty much automate. You have a number of different steps when it comes to understanding the project. It's collecting the data, convening the stakeholders, preliminary design, technical design, and then a financial analysis or financial assessment.
Yeah.
Now, technical analysis is a little bit more technical. You have to get boots on the ground. You have to inspect the equipment. You have to do environmental studies. You have to do site load studies. Depending on the size of the equipment, you have to look at the switchgear. You have to do all that stuff. We can't really automate that. But the other steps, we can absolutely automate. So if we can automate those and make those steps easier, we can significantly reduce the time it takes to short circuit that site discovery process.
Gotcha. Okay. I can definitely see it a lot clearer how you make it quicker and easier to like evaluate this, their like potential microgrid project. So your vision is to like do that like across the entire country. So what percentage of that vision have you realized so far?
So right now, we have very powerful mathematical models that can help us do so. And that's the core underlying technology of grid discovery. So we did a pilot study in New York where we identified a number of different microgrid projects in New York. We tested the model, we experimented with the model, and we implemented that model into our tool, which has now become a consumer-facing platform. So the next stage and the next step in our company growth is now commercializing this tool into a functioning product that engineers can get into and start doing research around the country.
Got you. Okay. And I also saw that in some of the posts on LinkedIn that you've put out that you've tagged the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. So what has that collaboration been about?
Yeah, so that's been a great collaboration. We actually won a cleantech seed grant from them based on our ability to help New Jersey advance their microgrid studies. And so New Jersey has a number of initiatives when it comes to microgrids. They have the Town Center DER initiative, where they want to bring in these community-based projects into their towns because of Hurricane Sandy, because of intensifying storm events from climate change, because of increased outages, because of the capital cost to modernize the grid. They know that microgrids can be a positive resource in that fight for all of those issues I just brought up. And so this grant helps us. The New Jersey NJEDA, in partnership with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, have said, hey, we recognize that grid discovery's technology can help us in this fight to implement more microgrids. So here's a grant that can help you commercialize your technology, get you started, get you up and running. And that's what that partnership has been about.
Got you. Yeah, I saw that one was a very recent development. So it seems like your traction's only going to be even more accelerated moving forward.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That grant was really helpful. We were able to continue building the platform, release the MVP, engage with our design partners. Our design partners are really excited. The commercial product should be done within the next couple of days. We have a number of things on the market. We're going to be hosting a couple of launch events, press events. demonstrating this technology to our design partners and other customers. And so there's a lot of things exciting on the horizon.
Gotcha. So things are very optimistic for grid discovery, for microgrids in general. But I want to flip the switch a little bit. No pun intended. What's your what's your biggest fear about the future of microgrids or our current infrastructure for power? Like, is there something that keeps you up at night when thinking about where this industry is heading?
Yes, I mean how much time do we have?
Try to answer it in 120 seconds.
Yeah, so that's a tough one to tackle in 120 seconds. But really quickly, I think the thing that keeps me up at night is the multiple input from stakeholders that microgrids require. And what I mean by that is that they require legislative power. They require utility input, they require engineering input, and they require business inputs. You have a number of different states that have pro microgrid related frameworks, and that allow microgrid developers to come in and say, hey, we can build a microgrid here that can operate independent from the main utility grid and in synchronous operation with the utility itself.
Right.
A lot of states and a lot of areas have zoning restrictions that don't allow third-party developers to come in and route electricity across public right-of-ways. This impacts developers' abilities to come in and place microgrids, and so it restricts the industry's ability to grow. States are working on this, but I think that's the biggest thing that right now that hinders the microgrid's growth ability.
Got you. Okay, so biggest barrier again are these, like, we'll call them borders, quote unquote borders.
Yep.
But on the flip side, as like these regulations like open up, like so will investments being poured into microgrids.
Oh yes.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to see as legislation opens up, you're going to see a feeding frenzy on those areas. You're seeing it in Maine. Maine just passed a landmark law that allows third parties to come in and kind of violate the zoning laws and the right of ways. You're seeing Connecticut adopt non-wire solutions, New Jersey, New York, California. We're seeing a lot of activity in Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, just because these states are being hindered by rising heat waves, electrical demand, natural disasters. So it's only a matter of time until microgrids become a very, very prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, I think I could see it even more clear now. So very last question, if you could answer this in maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Why should someone bet on you and Grid Discovery?
Simply put, Grid Discovery has amazing technology. We're backed by industry experts. We're backed by industry partners, and we have a ton of experience and motivation that can help bring more microgrids to the industry.
Totally. All right. That concludes our chat. Thank you again so much for your time, Matt. I enjoyed this conversation very thoroughly.
Thank you too. Yeah, thanks, Sean. It was great talking with you. Great questions. Happy to be here.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this interview, follow along on EarthABC's LinkedIn to stay connected and never miss what's going on in climate tech. If you'd like to reach out or you're interested in coming on as a guest, feel free to connect with me, Sean Pack, on LinkedIn. We're always looking for inspiring ventures and founders in the climate space to feature on the show. Hope you enjoyed. Until next time.